And good morning, everybody. Welcome to our January 2021 meeting, Triad Coaching Connection. And I'm so glad that each of you are here. Successful holiday season, start to the new year. If nothing else, we were able to say goodbye to 2020. And we have a plan, personal or professionally, to make 2021 even better than our best year, whatever that happened to have been, right? Sounds like something a coach would say. So I am going to share my screen to start off with to remind us of what our mission is. And this is it. Our mission is to develop and sustain a learning community that supports coaches and those interested in the practice of coaching. Triad Coaching Connection supports and preserves the integrity of a diverse and inclusive coaching profession through networking, learning opportunities, and educating others. And as I say, almost every meeting, if there's ever a time that you feel we are not supporting our mission, I welcome you to reach out to me, and we will correct all of that. Yeah, so good to see so many people here. So I know we're in different orders on different screens because some people are on iPhones, some on iPads, computers. My large monitor, I think I have everybody on there, up to 49 I can see on my screen. So if this is like one of your first meetings, if you haven't introduced yourself to the group in a past meeting, would you raise your hand and be recognized, unmute, and tell us who you are? And just jump on in there. Okay, Stacy, if you would please introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm Stacy Hackler. I'm double dutying today because I'm at my full-time job. I'm a clinical lead nurse for 3 practices. I'm starting coaching and just getting started, brand new to this. So I'm very excited to be able to join you guys today. I really want to focus on self-care coaching. Being a nurse, especially in the middle of a pandemic, I see so many patients that need different avenues of stress relief and just talking and figuring out how to get to the next step. People have lost their jobs. They're not being able to see their families, and just learning how to pull it together and get moving forward. A lot of patients that I've seen, they don't want the therapy avenue. They just want someone to be there to help guide them and get them to where they want to be, where they used to be, like in 2019, where they were, to where they have that feeling of joyfulness and happiness. So that's what kind of led me to this coaching avenue. So it's definitely a new journey for me. I'm really excited about it. Happy to be on here with you guys today. I do apologize. I may have to jump off and on and run in and out since I am in the office today with patients. But thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invite.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stacy. And if you would be sure that our membership chair, Linda Heyman, has your contact information. So I can give you all the information about TCC that you might need. You can just post that in the chat to her, a private message to her or to everybody, so we can all have your name and make you feel welcome to our group.
Thank you.
I'm looking around for other hands. Anybody else who has not introduced themselves to the Triad Coaching Connection before? Looking for hands. Anybody who wasn't with us in 2020 and this is your first meeting in a while, or only a couple of meetings, because there may be some new people who all right, very good. So if anybody, and that message that I sent to Stacy, it applies to any of you who are wanting more information about TCC and to be on our communications list and to get information about membership, please let our membership chair, Linda Heyman, know that. Linda, there you are, waving. Do you have anything you want to say?
No, hello, everybody. If you have any questions about membership or TCC, please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to set up a Zoom call or a phone call, whatever works. So welcome.
Great. And I'm looking to see if Christine was able to stay with, it looks like Christine wasn't able to stay with us. She and our webmaster are working on our Squarespace site and the ability to renew our memberships for 2021 online. So stay tuned for more information about getting our membership updated for 2021. We're going to come into the cutting edge of technology if it kills us. So they make it easy for us to get information from our website, to register, to do all the wonderful things that and get information from there. So very good. My next thing before I turn it over to our program chair to introduce our speaker is I have a little poll for you. So I have a couple of questions I would like to ask you. So I am going to put this poll out there for you, and you may have to scroll down on your screen to get to both questions that are in this. And this is an anonymous poll. Curious as to, with a group that we have here, what is your coaching experience level? And I can see folks clicking. And then the second one is, do you hold coaching certifications or credentials through a professional organization that provides credentialing to coaches, even if it's in a specialty kind of coaching? So yeah, very good. And I'll give it a couple of more minutes. I'm seeing that 29 of 36 attendees have voted, so we're about 80%. Give a couple of more seconds. Give you some time. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here's the results of that poll. As you can see that, yeah, quite a few, we've got a lot of experience in the room. And we have some folks who are just beginning. So yeah, our mission statement is certainly applicable to this group. Those who are coaching or interested in coaching, and those who hold coaching coaching certifications through a professional organization, and folks in process. One of the reasons I'm asking this is a board of directors is meeting later this month, and having a good idea of the makeup of our group, our organization, and determining what our needs are is going to be very helpful for us for that. So I'm going to now put up my next poll, and you should have expected this one. I am interested in your interest for actually attending. Why do you come? Is it for professional development and coaching, or networking with other coaches, or something else? And I believe I'm just asking for your primary. So I am going to launch that one. And the second question is, during 2021, select as many as you'd like as to your involvement with TCC. And please notice I did not put a none of the above. But I guess non-participation would be an answer to that one, but just very, very interested in how much activity involvement you would like to get. I will share from my own story in starting out with coaching. As a human resources professional, we coach employees all the time, whether we like the idea of the fact that we're coaching or not. and to become more professional at it, to get certification. Becoming involved in Triad Coaching Connection was a huge part of my professional development to help me be a better coach. So the more involved I got, the more confidence I got in my coaching, and the bigger my network became in having people to reach out to, because God knows, if you're honest as a coach, there are days that you don't know all the answers, and having someone that you can reach out to help you to coach someone can be extremely powerful. So it looks like 32 of 38 of you have voted. Very good. So I am going to end the poll and share the results. And it looks like our primary purpose for being here is our professional development and coaching, followed by networking. And then there are other reasons, and I'd love to hear any of those. Yeah, we have a couple of things going on in our chat box over here. So if there are other reasons you want to share with the group, you can feel free to chat it. And then the results for question number 2. We would love to see, we love seeing everybody wanting to be a member, yay. But serving on a committee can certainly help grow your experience, especially and working with other coaches in a more in a smaller group setting. Thank you so much for participating in that. And you may have to close that the window on your own device. I've just closed it on mine. So again, welcome everybody. Are there any announcements before I turn it over to Matthew to introduce our speaker?
Just a quick question. Can the chairs of those committees learn who had voted for what in terms of what committee they would like to be on?
Well, I made it anonymous because, you know, when it comes to polling, this was more for an interest to me. But yeah, I would like for those committee chair people to recognize themselves so that people can see. And private chat. So for example, we met Linda Heyman a few minutes ago. She's our membership chair. If you're interested in being on the membership committee, private message her in chat and say that I am Donna Burick and I want to be on the membership committee. That's just because you're just straight at my eye level, Donna. Or yeah, and then let's see, Christine Loeffler. Introduce yourself, Christine.
I'm doing it right now.
Okay, communications chair. So if you are interested in being on the communications committee.
Love to have you.
Yeah. Right now you're a committee of what, 1, maybe 2?
Yes.
And anybody who's gotten any communications from TCC knows that, you know, that's a lot of work for one person, and to have someone help with the crafting of those messages would be extremely wonderful. Where's Tom Stratton?
Hi, Wanda. Good morning, everyone. I work with the Diversity Committee. We'd love to have anyone who wants to be involved in that to join us. It's timely for you to join as it's January, and we have a meeting coming up in a week or so. And we'd love to have you join us. So send me a message and I'll make sure to give you the information.
Very good. Thank you so much. I am looking at some of the messages that are coming in on the chat. And I'm going to ask Linda Heyman as membership chair to answer Ronnie Graybon's question, if she would. Do you see her question on chat?
Yes, I do. So we are working on the email that will come out requesting renewal money. And Christine's been working very hard on just making sure everything works and all the links work. So that I think will be in the next week or so, Christine.
Yes, I imagine it'll be in the next couple of days. I am just finalizing the file that needs to be uploaded to specific members with the back end of Squarespace. I know that sounds weird, but it's all ready to go. And the good news is the updated website now will give everyone the opportunity to make their payments much more easily because you can do it online. And there is also expanded information on the site now. So we're really excited to give you the opportunity to engage with that more.
Very good.
And I'd like to give kudos to Christine, because she, along with your daughter, Wanda, have been working extremely hard on getting this website up for us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see, who am I missing? Matthew, program chair. Now, since a lot of you are here about your professional development, helping to work with the program committee. Matthew, you want to say anything?
Good morning, everyone. I'm the program chair, Matthew McMillan, and we welcome anybody that love to join us to find great speakers and presenters. We have Linda Reese that's joined me recently to assist, so I've been greatly supported there. Christine supports me a great deal as well, and Wanda. We'd love to have more folks. And also, if you know anybody that would be a great presentation for us here as membership, I'm also been on the membership committee as well. So would invite you to send a message to me. I'll put something in the chat later after we get going, so you have a way to contact me. But we really love to bring great programs to everyone. And so if you know of a great speaker, let me know.
Very good. And who did I miss? Which committee did I miss? Okay. I got lost in my multitasking. I see squirrels and actually I lose my train of thought. All right, thank you again for being here. And I think you're going to love this program. So Matthew, I will turn it over to you and let you introduce our speaker.
Great. Well, thank you, Wanda. Before we do, though, I'd like to ask all of us to send an appreciation to Mitch Miles. He has been the co-chair of the program committee with me, and he's done amazing work last year. And so I'll miss him being on the committee, but he's always the support behind the scenes. So I really invite you to reach out to him, whether an email or a chat here today, and just thank him for all his great work, because he put in a lot of work last year to make Triad Coaching Connection what it was. So switching gears, I want to introduce you to Lyndon Rego. Lyndon Rego is bringing a fascinating program to us today called Cultivating Courageous Community Dialogues. And it's such a timely thing right now because of all that's been going on. So when we learn to have courageous conversations, notice what can happen as a coach with ourselves and with clients and just the community at large. So I'm excited to tell you about Lyndon as I've gotten to know him more and more. Lyndon worked with Triad Coaching Connection for over 14 years, putting together very innovative programs that were transformative, not only in our local community, but across the world. He worked in over 12 different countries in a transformative program called Leadership Beyond Boundaries. And that was to bring leadership to not only just, the high-powered folks like CEOs and leadership of companies, but even to nonprofits and smaller groups. So Lyndon focuses at that intersection of leadership, innovation, and transformation. He has worked in those 12 different countries plus, like Asia, Africa, working not only just with individuals, but also organizations and teams, and bringing that leadership to the small level, but to the big level. So it creates a transformation throughout the whole organization. And out of that, Lyndon has created and founded a program called Cometa, which is an innovative way to build community and revitalize the triad. Specifically, he's been focusing on Greensboro. And today, Lyndon's going to challenge us as coaches to really learn how to have courageous conversations. So as we know, the hardest thing to go through is a closed mind. So today, keep an open mind as you listen to Lyndon and challenge yourself to be a better coach. And let's start 2021 with a bang, because we're going to have a great year. And Lyndon's going to challenge us in such new ways that I hope you will see how we can build a stronger community, not only in Triad Coaching Connection, but also in the community around us. So Lyndon, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate the welcome. And I'm delighted to see so many familiar faces, perhaps from the CCL network or some of the community conversations that we've had. I'm going to share my screen because I've got a slide deck to start us off. So can you see my screen? It should be coming up there. And I can no longer see you. So just let me know in case something isn't visible anymore. As Matthew said, this is really around the issue of community, something that I think is very relevant today, and we'll get into some of the perhaps the events of last week that relate to this topic. But I wanted to start us out also with a question. And what brought you here today to the session? And perhaps you always come to these meetings, but is there something about the topic that actually attracted you? If you'd put that into the chat. So question for you, what brought you here today? And specifically thinking about the topic, and perhaps you always come to these meetings as a matter of course, but was there something that attracted you? And I see the word courageous, curiosity, community, service, interest in this effort, thinking about a divided nation. Great. So it's a little bit of the why that you've brought to the session, and I wanted to maybe share with you a little bit of my why, what got me here in my journey. And I grew up in about 3 different countries, in the Middle East and India, and came over to America. But mostly what I want to talk about is perhaps the last 3 professional roles I've had that have really put me on this path to joining you here today. So I spent 14 years at the Center for Creative Leadership, and then a couple of years with an institution called the African Leadership University, and then returned to North Carolina and Greensboro to launch Cometa. But at CCL, as Matthew mentioned, I spent 14 years leading innovation practice, and much of that was spent on an effort called Leadership Beyond Boundaries. And some of the folks on the call today who've been part of CCL as coaches probably have some familiarity with this effort. But the mission of Leadership Beyond Boundaries was really to think about how could we take what the center was doing, which was very powerful, but extended to many more people in the world. And if you went back something like 20 years, CCL was primarily a North American and a European entity. And the world was changing, was becoming more globalized. And we were starting to understand leadership in different ways. And there was a need to think about, well, how do we get leadership development to more people in more countries and more sectors at younger stages in life when they're still going through school and university to build those capabilities. So we built a practice that over the course of about 10 years reached about 500,000 people in as many as 50 countries. I heard somebody say that it might be up to about 1 million people. But what we really did was harvest a lot of the knowledge and expertise that the center had created and put it in the hands of more people around the world so that they could extend it out through various institutions and practices. About 10 years into this work, I started something called the Future Leadership Lab because my work had become more managerial and I was interested in innovation. And the Future Leadership Lab was looking at where's the future going? And the central issue that was on people's mind was really around technology and disruption. So spending time in Silicon Valley and looking at how startups were working, how those organizations had developed cultures and how leadership development needed to change. But I was also looking at a lot of trend data. And one of the things that really caught my eye was a demographic shift in the world. And this indicated that while most of the world's population is declining or flattening, the population of Africa was soaring, was actually going to quadruple this century is the expectation, which means by the end of the century, about half the world's people are going to be from Africa. And with that in mind, I actually connected with a person who had launched an institution in South Africa called the African Leadership Academy, which had gotten a lot of accolades, and he'd done a TED Talk where he'd shared a vision of building a network of universities across Africa, because there isn't as much opportunity for tertiary education. And this vision of actually developing 3 million entrepreneurial leaders for Africa, because he said the most fundamental thing that Africa needs is leaders, people who can kind of build new models, new organizations, address the challenges of the day. So when I connected with him, he invited me to come over and start up a Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership, because although they were an institution about leadership, they didn't necessarily have anybody who was focused on leadership per se. So I went over, and one of the things that I quickly discovered when I was there was that although leadership was at the center of their name, a lot of the practice that they were sharing came from places like the Center for Creative Leadership, because of course they didn't have as many of the universities and research to develop models. So I started to look at notions of what's African leadership about. And what really emerged was notions of community. Many of you might be familiar with the term Ubuntu, which was popularized by Desmond Tutu, who won the Nobel Peace Prize. And Ubuntu translates simply as I am because we are. So it recognizes that we're all individuals who have unique identities and unique stories, but we're also parts of collectives. And how do you harmonize the two becomes a central issue. And in many African traditions, there is this notion of offering respect and dignity to people, but also notions of unity. The saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, to go together, is an African saying that's perhaps the one that we've heard of. And it's very true in terms of the orientation of community. And as I was in Africa doing this work, I was starting to see the rising wave of polarization in the world. And not only in the United States, as is clear, but in so many countries around the world, in India, where I come from originally, certainly in places like Turkey and the Philippines. And there's something going on in the world, and I think it had to do with the notion of the way that we're evolving, living in big cities, living busy lives, that there was a breakdown in our ability to really get to know each other in the ways that maybe people who lived in smaller towns and smaller societies could be together. So the question that I was starting to explore is, how do we create community in the modern world? Because we're not going to go back to small towns and villages, but there is a desperate need for rebuilding the fabric of what it is that we've lost. So some of this journey was really thinking about that. And it really got me then to an insight of how I might make this happen. And it was really around creating spaces and processes to build connection and empathy and unity. And I decided to come back to America and launch this effort called Cometa. And as I'll share, I picked Greensboro as a place to do this. But this word Cometa is a word that's made up, but meta, as some of you might know, is an old word from Pali, perhaps dating back several thousand years, and it translates into loving kindness, and it's a meditative practice, a spiritual practice. So kometa is a word that signifies shared loving kindness or community loving kindness. It's how do we extend the spirit of loving kindness in our communities to more people. And Greensboro became the place that I thought I might see if I could get this going, partly because I'd worked at the center and I knew some people here. But it's also a place that has many unique attributes. It's a city that the Quakers established, building a lot of practices of listening and respect and dignity and social change. We are in many ways the incubator of the civil rights movement and notions of how do we build this beloved community. We're a city that has great diversity and is also a settlement city for migrants and refugees. We've got this network of educational institutions. And we're very much like many parts of the world, also a place where the past is not where perhaps the future needs to be, but we're a manufacturing town that's still trying to figure out how do we compete and thrive into the future. So with these dynamics, it seemed like a good place to try to figure out how to make this work. I wanted to return to the word community, which is a word that we know, and it very simply, of course, is a hybrid of common unity. So how do we find common unity? But it's also derived from the word communion, and communion is about coming together as one. You know, somehow being able to melt away the differences and have this deeper sense of almost spiritual unity. And the word community is related to the word communication. And that's also a hint of how do we build community? We must find ways to connect and communicate with each other. And the picture that I have on my screen dates back to when I was living in Mauritius, working for the African Leadership University. And on this little island, there were often cyclones and cyclone warnings. And so this was one of them. And being an island, a lot of people made their living off fishing. And when the storm was coming in, what struck me was that there were a whole lot of fishermen that needed to get their boats out of the water. But what they did was that they all went in together, not each trying to take care of their own boats, but actually pulling together, you know, pulling for one another, bringing the boats in together. So you didn't know whose boat it was. It was very much the spirit of what community is about. We have these relationships and we're there for each other to help each other at times of need. And this is perhaps what it is that we've lost. And so for me, part of the journey back was really thinking about how do we revive those connections and, you know, how do we come together and tell our stories? How do we meet new people and foster levels of respect and empathy? So this was a gathering, which was one of several that we did at community hubs around Greensboro. This was at Christ United Methodist Church in the Glenwood neighborhood. And people came together and had a chance to sit at tables with people that they didn't know. There were a few speakers that we had that spoke to the theme that we had for the evening. But fundamentally, the idea here was to have people sit at tables and to share their own perspectives and stories. So you'll get to experience some of that today with this model. When COVID hit earlier last year, it became very clear that, you know, we weren't able to continue to meet face to face. And so we pivoted to running gatherings on Zoom, which has benefits, but also many, many limitations. And it also became very clear at one of these gatherings that we ran on Earth Day, is that people felt like we're in a space of significant disruption. And we just don't want to go back to the way things were because so much was broken. So how do we come out of this very deep event that is still unfolding and somehow create a better future? So we launched an effort called Regenesis Greensboro, which was a community poll that perhaps some of you responded to. And what came back to us was that Greensboro's got a lot going for it. But the thing that's very central on people's minds was the level of inequality and separation. And the factors that people raised, whether it was about healthcare or housing or access to food, to education, to economic opportunity, was deeply colored by this level of inequality. It was a different experience based on where you're coming from. So how do we address this? So we did an event at the Civil Rights Museum late last year called Now's the Time, which brought together a lot of organizations working on equity issues to speak together, to offer a vision. We had the mayor and city council be a part of that event. And so it remains, as we lean into the future, that this remains a very central challenge. We saw it in the elections, of course, where it was a primary driver of how people voted. Of course, driving summer last year was the protest following the killing of George Floyd, but so many others that was really moved to the forefront of our awareness and recognizing that this was a very central and important issue that we had to deal with as a nation. But also from the elections, what became very clear, and also with what's going on right now, was the level of polarization, the level of separation people felt about these issues. And there's a person by the name of Robert Putnam who wrote a book a couple of decades ago, I think that was quite influential in explaining the shift in America. And it was a book called Bowling Alone. And it talked about how we'd moved from a society where people gathered in social networks like bowling leagues and got together time to time, where we had really retreated to our homes. And perhaps it had to do with air conditioning and had to do with television. But there are other factors as well that drove this. So he recently put out a book last year called The Upswing. And you can see a graph on this slide here that really was this dynamic that he pointed out to you that was reflected of so many things that had shifted. And given the people who are on this call, many of you have lived through this. So he said, leading up to about 1970 last year, there was a steady uptick in a lot of social drivers, a lot of factors that were actually bringing us together, creating a better life. But at 1970, things turned around and we started to see an increase in polarization, an increase in inequality, an increase in self-centeredness, and an increase in social isolation. And these are factors that have really led to the decline of unity where we find ourselves today. The trend has been very, very sharp, as you can see from this chart, but it's also been salient across so many aspects of our life. And if you've been tracking again with economic indicators, you'll see the same pattern play out with what had happened leading up to 1970 and beyond that. So the implications of this are pretty significant. There was a survey done by the Pew Charitable Trust, the Pew organization that gathers data on what people are thinking. And what they found is that we as Americans don't have a very positive outlook of the future based on what's going down. So most Americans, I'll just read this to you. This is a little excerpt from their report. Most Americans expect income inequality to worsen over the next 3 decades. Majority say that the economy will be weaker. The nation's debt burden will be heavier. The environment will be in worse condition. And healthcare will be less affordable than today. Most believe that the US will play a less important role in the world. And so the implications of what's going down with this decline is that we find ourselves in a place where perhaps we're not so positive about the future and we don't think that things will be better. And we have an opportunity to think about what could be different. And last week, of course, what happened on Capitol Hill is the sharp reminder of the implications of those trends, right? The level of polarization and the implications of that polarization, of the divide in America. And many of you have, of course, seen this coming. Perhaps now that we look back, the patterns have been very, very clear. And one of the people who's written about this, like Robert Putnam, is David Brooks. And David Brooks is somebody you might see on the Sunday morning talk shows, but he's also on PBS and he writes for the New York Times. And he had come over to Winston-Salem, I think it was last year, perhaps late in the year before, for a talk. And he said something that he's reflected in various things. And this is an excerpt for something that he wrote that I'd like to read to you. And it really is about this notion of what's going on in America. He said, we've entered into an age of bad generalization. We don't see each other well. We do not see the heart and soul of each person, only a bunch of bad labels. To me, this is the core problem that our democratic character is faced with. Many of our society's great problems flow from people not feeling seen and known. Blacks feeling that their daily experience is not understood by whites. Rural people feeling not seen by the coastal elite. Depressed young people not feeling understood by anyone. People across political divides getting angry with one another and feeling incomprehension. Employees feeling invisible at work, husbands and wives living in broken marriages, realizing the person who should know them best actually has no clue. We all have to get a little bit better at seeing each other deeply and being seen. So this notion that he's really relating to the state of the country, but also what's going on in our organizations and our relationships, has to do with really being seen. And, just coming back to Africa, curiously, one of the words that I had on my screen earlier when I was talking about African leadership is the word Sawubona. And if you've been in South Africa, you know this word because it's how people greet each other. It's a way of saying hello, but it translates into I see you. And so when people meet each other, they're greeting people with this expression of I see you. And it's really important that people are acknowledged and they answer with another word called Nikigona. And this really means that I'm here, that I, if you will, I feel seen, I feel acknowledged. And this is what this is about. And I think the question then becomes really to say, well, who's responsible for changing things? So if we went through what we did last week, whose problem is it? And one of the things that I understand, is that the opposite of war is not peace, because peace is a neutral state. It's neither war. But on the other hand, the opposite of war is peacemaking. That in fact, if that we have to come to a place of peace, we have to make peace, that it's an active practice. And whose problem is it? Well, it's really up to all of us, right? Because the people who showed up last week in certainly the protests in Capitol Hill didn't come from Washington, D.C., but they came from all over the country. They weren't necessarily young people. The average age, as I understood, were people in their 40s. They'd been around. And there is a deep divide all across the country around the state of affairs. And it's of course driven, this is a complex chart, but the point that it's making is what we've experienced, especially in this digital age and with social media, is one level that we all have a voice that we can extend out there into the world. But these technologies also reviving a lot of tribal affiliations and resulting in a level of populism, which is around almost enforcing a certain identity on everybody else. Again, different from that idea of Ubuntu, which is recognizing that we're all individuals, have a unique story. And really what we've lost, which I've circled out there, is human connection, human conversation. So for me, a key in all of this and all the work that I've done is really about how do we revive spaces for human connection and human conversation, the thing that digital conversations has been putting us away. And can we do this in a way that reflects our modern existence, again, which is really embedded in technology? So leading into this year, really it started to talk about this vision of saying, well, can we come back to one? This is the central challenge, certainly of our times, but the long-term future of our country, that we need to find a way to reverse that trend that Robert Putnam had shared about how do we come back to unity? How do we care about each other? And Margaret Wheatley, who many of you know, said that very great change starts from very small conversations held among people who care. So it's really about caring and being able to connect to each other. So here we are, right, with a group of coaches and counselors, people who are very much about these ideas of connecting through conversation. So I wanted to maybe to pause for a moment and ask you to use the chat and say, well, what's the essence of coaching to you? So if you're a coach, what's a word or two that you might say lies at the heart of what coaching is about? And if you could use the chat for this, so we could read what each other says. So I see the comments coming in, listening to understand at a deeper level, being seen and seeing, listening comes up quite a bit. Breakthroughs, understanding, being heard, listening and being, connecting in a meaningful way, being together on a journey, listening and hearing, presence, making connection on a number of levels, communication, right? A lot of the things that you're putting out are at the heart of what this practice of coaching is, right? And we can see, I hope, that it is very central to these issues that we're talking about, to becoming open to learning and encouragement and locking the door. So if I really think about the things that you've been saying, these are some words that I put on that really echo what you've said. It's the notion of presence, being present to each other, really connecting, offering respect and attention, being curious, listening, the spirit of inquiry and asking questions, and ultimately of co-creation, that it is about finding answers that we can, if you will, both own, right? If we hold each other's agendas. So coming back to my time at CCL and Leadership Beyond Boundaries, one of the things that we had done as we were working to democratize leadership development was really think about, could we, if you will, democratize this practice of coaching, where people, if you will, could all get better at using the skills and capabilities of what coaches do, the coach approach, to have better conversations. And Zippy, who I know is on this call today, was one of the people that collaborated with my wife, Philomena, and another person by the name of Pat Williams, to create a toolkit that we call the Creative Leadership Conversations Toolkit. And it's a device that we actually used in places like Ethiopia, and El Salvador, and Jamaica, and Myanmar, and other parts of the world, to really start to say, well, could we get better at conversations for enhancing the effectiveness of certainly organizations, but also in society. So in Myanmar, this dates to when the military junta was in power, and the woman that you see in the bottom left was recognized as one of the great female change makers in the world, and she was part of this training. And I want to talk a little bit more about also what happened in El Salvador, which was central. And again, a person who's part of this network, I think at certain times, is a person by the name of David Dawn, and he was active in helping take this practice into El Salvador. But I wanted to share with you what was different about this. And here's a model that we created. And if you look at a lot of what people try to do when they fix problems, which is a strategic approach, is to move into the right side of that equation. They say, well, where are we trying to go, and how do we get there, and who's going to do what? It's very much a planning orientation. And what we were doing, again, using the coach approach, was actually starting on the left side. Again, with the things that you've talked about, I said, well, how do we actually establish relationships, and how do we recognize who we each other are, and talk about what really matters, these issues of values, and start the conversation there. And we did this using mechanisms like social identity mapping that, again, a person I think that comes to some of these gatherings by the name of Kelly Hannon has also been instrumental in developing at the Center for Creative Leadership. And we want to use those techniques of inquiry and listening and feedback to actually listen to each other. But what was fundamental about this, and why it really made a difference, is when we started the conversation with actually listening to each other and listening to each other's stories, but when we got to the second stage of saying, well, where are we trying to go? It was a very different conversation, because what now existed was a level of connection, of respect. And if we were trying to find solutions, it wasn't just about influencing the other as the rightness of my perspective, but was really saying, well, I value where you're coming from, and you have different experiences that led you to a different place. How do we find co-creative solutions that meet your needs and mine as well? So fundamentally, this idea of actually starting with building empathy changed the outcomes. So this is the heart of this approach. And as we recognize, as many of you work in organizations, that this is a need as well. We've got departments, there's hierarchy, there are racial differences, there are differences of political belief. We've seen the gender issue really emerge as being very significant in the last couple of years as a factor that at least has moved to our level of awareness. Generational differences, geographic differences. A lot of these create boundaries of separation as well. And many of us know that sometimes organizational environments can be also quite toxic. And I worked with a number of organizations, and one of them, which I won't name by name, but a very large global entity, very significant, that attracted the best and brightest people to their ranks. And coming and getting a job there was a great honor. But people, once they came in, felt very burnt out and perhaps left after a couple of years. I've worked for a number of organizations, or worked with a number of organizations that have these dynamics going on. And what happens is that people feel disrespected. They don't feel seen, right? And they don't feel understood and acknowledged. And organizational effectiveness really breaks down. So this is relevant certainly in societal systems, but also in our organizations. So coming back to what we might do, the vision for Courageous Community Dialogue, what we're trying to do here is really revive the same kind of ideas that were in the Creative Leadership Conversations series, to say, well, can we create spaces for coming together, for convening, for actually sharing who we are and our stories? And can we create a space to be acknowledged, to be seen, to reflect back what it is that we've heard? And then to connect with each other around those perspectives, to think about where it is that we might go together, right? And so this notion that David Brooks talked about that's embedded in Saubona is really about saying, well, how can we get better at seeing each other? How can we create these community conversations that help us connect with strangers, people who live side by side with us, but we don't really know? How can we get better at exercising empathy and fostering better understanding and deeper relationships? So we're going to come into the point where actually we're going to lean into a practice and a tool using some of these techniques that we've been discussing here. But before I go there, and I'm going to give us instructions, I wonder if people have any thoughts and questions. And when I'm doing this on Zoom, I no longer see you. But I'm wondering if there is anything that people might like to speak to, or say, or ask a question, if you will. Feel free to kind of speak up or put something in the chat. But we can also come back to this after we do this next part, which will be leaning into a conversation. But I'm just going to pause for a moment, and I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you. Good. Well, I see some issues in the chat, but I don't necessarily see any questions. So if it's okay, let's move back into the activity where we'll actually get a chance to connect together and use this tool. So as you'll see on here, you'll see that there is a link, and I'm going to put that link into the chat as well for you. And what you're going to do is to click on that link, and it'll take you to a web page where you'll see a series of images, and you'll have an opportunity, let me do that right now, to actually, it's coming up on my screen. You'll have an opportunity to browse those images and then find an image and a question, because they all come with a question, such as this one: what makes a relationship wonderful? And you'll see that there is some additional text, because in building this, we're limited by how many characters in the headline. But sometimes there's a little bit more. This one says, what makes a relationship wonderful? With whom do you have a wonderful relationship? So find a question that you might like to speak to. So every person will have a chance to browse through this and find a question. So as you scroll down, you'll see a lot of images. These are all images that were either taken in Greensboro or were created by Greensboro artists and photographers, so they have a local bent to them. In some cases, you'll see images of places in the city itself that you'd recognize, but these are all Greensboro related images. And if you get to the bottom and you haven't found anything that perhaps speaks to you as something that you might like to respond to, you'll find that there are actually 2 more pages that you can click through that have more images and more questions. So you'll have about 5 minutes just to browse through these images, find a question that you might like to speak to. And you'll see above every question is a number. So you'll see this image that has a set of camera images. It says, what do you tend to collect? And there is a number about that in small letters that says 20. So remember that number, because it'll be useful in the activity that we'll do to point people out, to help them find the image that you've actually selected. Yeah. So let me come back to my presentation here and the instructions. So what we're going to do is that Wanda here is going to be putting us in breakout groups of about 3 to 4 people each. And so first you'll each go off, and we'll put that link in the chat for you. Let me do that here.
I just put it in the
And
chat for
oh,
you.
you did. Great. Thank you.
And I also put the instructions in case anybody wants to copy those to have them available.
Great. Great.
Breakout.
And we'll send those also, I think, to you once you're in the breakout groups, because I think you'll lose sight of the chat once you're in your breakout. So once again, you'll have about 5 minutes to go and find the image using that link. Find an image and a question that you might like to speak to. Just take a little bit of time to just reflect on that question, create a little bit of pause within yourself. And then once you're on that breakout group with other folks, you will have a chance to take turns sharing your response. And this is the way it's going to go. You'll have, say, somebody starts in your group, that person will have about 5 minutes to share a response to that question. So a good bit of time to speak. And you're all coaches here, so if somebody feels like, well, they only speak for about a minute or so, feel free to ask them some additional questions so they can elaborate on what it is that they've said. So after they've had about 5 minutes to speak, the other 2 or 3 people that are part of the group will take a minute or so each to just play back what it is that they've heard. So we'll get a chance to practice some deep listening, but we'll also get to play back to the speaker and let them know that they've been heard. And sometimes what it is that we've heard is different from what the person said, but it's also valuable information. But it's a certain kind of acknowledgement and a certain level of processing. So we'll all have in our groups a chance to take a minute or so just to say, here's what I heard from you as I was listening. Here's what I picked up, right? And perhaps if you wish, how did it connect with me? Because this is the basis of relationships, because we find in ourselves the other. And then it'll come back to the speaker, and the speaker will have about a minute to conclude. This is just to thank the people who've reflected back, or to acknowledge what they've said, or share what they've received from that sharing, right? And then it'll move on to the second person in your group of 3 or 4, and you'll have, once again, a chance to take 5 minutes to share your question and the image, and have people speak back to you on what it is that they've heard, and you to summarize what it is that you're taking away. And then once again, on to the next person, right? So you'll have, I think where we are, we're at about 10 o'clock right now. Let's give ourselves 40 minutes for this activity. So if you have a group of 3 to 4, that means we have essentially about 10 minutes per person question cycle of going through the speaker speaking, the listeners reflecting back, and the conclusion. And if you have a little bit of time at the end, you can do some meaning making of really what are the threads that emerged across the various stories that you've shared and what it might mean for you, right? So I think Wanda is now going to put us into groups. If you have any questions, feel free to raise them or put them in the chat. And once again, individually, you will go and find your image. So we won't be doing the image seeking in cycles, rather that we'll do this at the same time in those first 5 minutes, but you'll be in your groups. So if you are done with your image and you feel that people haven't come back to join you, feel free to speak up, because I think your fellow group members in your Zoom breakout will be able to hear you. So just kind of manage that experience, but make sure that you share the time, you're monitoring the time, and make sure that you get through this process of being able to give every person a chance to speak and to be heard and to reflect back to them, and just to spend the time in that meaning making at the end. Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm glad that it seems like I know that a lot of people exit when we do breakouts, but it looks like most people stayed. So I'm delighted that you've been able to make your way through that kind of process. I'm going to share my screen once again. I've got a couple of slides just to get us through the rest of the conversation. Let me see, share. Great. So we did these breakouts. We got into conversations using this tool And the question that I have for you, again, maybe once again to use the chat so we can all talk simultaneously together, is what did you experience from that little journey using the tool, sitting with a small group of people? What did you feel? The second question is, what enabled you to connect with each other? And if anything, what changed in you as a result of that conversation? So what did you feel? What made that possible, if you felt a sense of connection, and what changed? So if you would put some thoughts in the chat about your experience, I'd love to see what you took away. So I'm seeing the comments coming in. I'll let you all type. So I don't have my voiceover as used, right? So I'm seeing some of the comments back here. Things that say, wonderful experience, awareness, insights into people's worlds, energized hearing personal stories, a sense of love and connection, connection through pain, probably with what people were sharing, with levels of vulnerability, openness to new ideas that emerged, a sense of shared community. We found ourselves perhaps in each other, new perspectives, reminded about how important connection with others is, just the enjoyment and delight of connection, the sense of community and relationships, feelings of acceptance, trust, and motivation, feeling seen, sense of connection and relief, and mutual connection. So many common ideas, but also appreciation that just moving to this process, again, if the intention was to be seen and to see others, I think we're able to do that in a short amount of time, right? And so the question that I then have, which is really looking into the future, is, what are the opportunities that we might have to extend this kind of dialogue in our communities, right? So in my breakout group, we had Joyce Richmond, who talked about how TCC was the creation of the community, but also some work that she'd been involved in actually when Greensboro was going through a recession, to actually help people receive coaching so they could figure out how to shift their careers. So there is power in what you do, I think, as coaches, as facilitators, that can also create a sense of connection and healing. You have the skill sets. So the question that I have for you is, as a result of what you might have experienced today, which seems to be positive, is what might we do to create more of these spaces for people to connect with more people? I think as coaches, again, you're typically working with people one-on-one at a personal level, but this need to actually foster greater circles of interaction and connection, as I talked about in this presentation, is the need of the day. So I really appreciate any thoughts that you might be able to put into the chat, and feel free to speak if you'd like, maybe as well, of what we might do to kind of create the sense of unity and healing and relationship that is so missing in the world today. So what can we do to widen the circle of conversation in our community? See a comment about really needing to create spaces for conversation with people who might share different perspectives. And that's really challenging sometimes, because we're not sometimes connected to people who might be different. We tend to be connected to people who are more similar. This notion of dare to invite conversations, to step out and be present to listen, connect with folks that we don't know well. Also to reach out sometimes to minority communities, maybe people who are not included in typical circles where conversations may be happening, being open and less judgmental, showing empathy, interest. Show up in unfamiliar places, soup kitchens, for example. That's really important, I think. When I was doing some of this work at the Civil Rights Museum, I think there was a recognition that people are supposed to show up downtown and be part of the mainstream, but there are events that happen, say in East Greensboro, in other parts of town, and people who are part of the mainstream simply don't show up to those community gatherings. It's like, well, come to our gatherings if you want to belong, but we're not going to show up necessarily for your gatherings. So it's a really important point. There's lots of opportunities to listen. This point here about creating a TCC community-wide volunteer project, something that I'd like to kind of build on a little bit. It's an opportunity. Could this collective do something together that drives this forward? Be curious and loving. Creating conversations, especially in exposure in schools. Book club on Zoom, again, focusing on spaces to have something to talk about, but also being inclusive. Great ideas. So, see, there's still some more comments. Can we do a Zoom in this in volunteer mode? So yeah, absolutely. So that's where I'd like to maybe go as I close this out here, is to say that my hope, is really, again, coming back to Greensboro, is how could we go far together? That African saying that the need of the day is really to think long-term about the community that we want to create and to invest in it. And so in this year, 2021, can we go from many to one, of creating this one community that's inclusive? And could we, as a network of catalysts and coaches and facilitators, step up to create these conversations with people that we don't know, to create a sense of healing, of understanding and appreciation and empathy, and do this in ways that hopefully that you experienced, where we all felt heard and we all feel connected and we all feel that we belong. So I'd love to close out with something that I wrote late last year, after the elections, where again, my thoughts about Greensboro that maybe brings all of this full circle. And it says, once the Quakers who created the village that became Greensboro gathered with neighbors in circles to sit in silence and engage in conversation. Then they rose to act with compassion and courage, to breathe unity into community, to create a garden that became a city. Of course, the beginnings was the new garden area of Greensboro around Guildford. Now we stand apart as strangers, speaking, but not hearing, turning away in mistrust. Can we return our city to the garden it was, or restoring the circles of conversation that created the bonds of community? For a community is not a network of roads and buildings, not rows of storefronts, no neighborhood parks. A community is a web of people connected by relationships of concern and caring, formed by the simple act of gathering, listening, and giving the gift of attention, speaking face to face, connecting heart to heart, weaving an ever-widening circle of inclusion, understanding, and compassion around us, a circle of connection, belonging, and common unity. So will you join in? Will you meet, look and listen, to turn a stranger to a neighbor to a friend? The way to take a stand is to take a seat in the circle, for we are better together, walking side by side, working hand in hand, building a future where we all belong to each other. So that's what I have for you today. I put my email there, lyndonrego@gmail.com. And, certainly welcome. I've enjoyed the conversations that I was part of in the small group and didn't get to speak with every one of you, but I'd certainly love to connect. If some of this resonates with you and you'd like to talk a little bit more, please reach out to me. So that's the end of my presentation. I'll stop my share and turn it back to Wanda. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful program. I've noticed in the chat, there's some folks that are wanting a copy of your presentation, some who are wanting a copy of your poem. We put the link to the video recording of this meeting on our website. It'll be up probably within the next week. And if Lyndon will share whatever of this you're willing to share, we can put that as a link on the website with the video, if that's okay.
Yes, I will share the presentation and the poem. Thank you.
So Matthew, if you would like to let us know about next
Yeah.
month's program.
Yes. So first of all, thank you, Lyndon, for that excellent presentation. And like Wanda said, please share with us your contact information so we can continue the conversation. Our goal this year is really to challenge us as members of TCC to get out and have a sense of community. So let's follow up with what Lyndon's conversations are about and get out there and do that. In February, we're going to look into a different area, an area that many of us have been challenged with, or those around us have been challenged with, and that's during this time of uncertainty about how to deal with financial uncertainty. So Vishali Shal is going to present to us, in times of financial uncertainty, tools to reduce short-term stress and create long-term focus. Vishali has been in the financial industry for over 10 years and is a veteran there. And she has also been an elementary school teacher. So she's going to bring a great blend of how to help facilitate and teach us conversations for our coaching clients and for companies, say their employees, how to deal with these uncertain times of financial distress. So she's going to encourage us to look at how can we create a conversation around finances and financial planning and creating our future. So I invite you to come back in February. Do you know the date of that, Wanda, by chance? February 11th, is it? Sorry, I should have that. February 8th.
Yeah.
February 8th. Come back and join us and learn more about how we can open up that conversation as we go forward this year. And once again, I want to thank everyone for being here today. And it's great to see so many smiling faces starting out the new year. So keep that smile going the rest of the day and share it with someone else. So thank you very much. Take care. And if you'd like to save the conversation, please go down into the chat box and you'll see the 3 dots. And that's how you can always save a Zoom conversation. So you have all the information, contact information from each Zoom call. Just a little tidbit for you going forward. So.
You would have lost the chat from the first part when you went to the breakout group. So if there's anything from the first part of the meeting that you want, just reach out to me and I can share that chat with you.
Great. Thank you. Have an awesome Monday.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye. Take care. It's great to see everyone.
Lyndon, thank you very, very much for today.
Thanks, Harold.
You're very welcome. No, we're always in passing, you and I, but thank you for what you've done today and what you've been doing over the years.
I wanted to also add Linda's group, Cometa, provides so many wonderful opportunities for growth, and I've been a part of that and want to commend him on his ability to connect that to our coaching community today. I appreciate very much his accepting my invitation, and I think the program has deepened our understanding of the meaning of connection itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, for bringing
Yes.
Very well put. Thank you.